Joshua, do you want to introduce yourself and say hi to everybody? It'd be nice to get to know you.
Hey, so I'm Josh Lavikal. So I came to know about Meshery from your O'Reilly class. I attended advanced Istio, your training. I thought it was very good, and this Meshery was really cool too. So I got some invite, joined your Slack, and that's how it got started. I work with Oracle. And I've been a developer right now, working as an application architect for one of the enterprise application at Oracle, primarily on the life sciences space, developing application for clinical trial management. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I'm intrigued. Say more if you can about the application itself. Some of what it does, or like.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking like medical imaging, or we're talking.
So essentially, this is to enable pharma companies run clinical trials, leveraging latest technology stack, such as collection of data from a mobile device, collecting data directly from the medical devices, and transferring data to the backend, right, the cloud, and doing analytics on top of that, and derive some insights and deliver that insights to downstream enterprise application, or some or analytics platform, or existing enterprise application. So eventually that data will be submitted back to FDA for their drug approval.
It's a lot of responsibility that you just laid out there. Yeah, hopefully any analytics, like anomaly detection or what have you, that's going on is pretty accurate. Are we talking Hadoop here? Are we talking like TensorFlow or?
It is. What we built is a platform, and it has multiple capabilities. Like Hadoop is there, and TensorFlow, Spark. So in this case, the customer will be able to choose, based on their expertise, in the technology stack they're familiar with, to pick the platform for their use case.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, you're not holding. You're getting them. You're doing some ETLs, but you're getting them the raw stuff if they want it, or in the form that they want. Nice. All right, I'm intrigued. Okay, good. Well, you got suckered in, man. You got hooked. Okay, let's. Nice to have you.
Sure.
Oh, there's a couple of other. We got our hooks into some other folks who are maybe second or third time on the call as well. So this is great. Shriti, I interrupted the flow here. I back to you.
No issues. All right. I like to start off meetings with a basic intro to the meeting for anybody who's new. So the Meshery Dev Call is for anything related around or based on the Meshery projects. Feel free to add any topics to the agenda list even before the meeting or during the meeting. That's strict here. We have a couple of issues today, which are, well, varied. And yeah, that's it. Let's start. Is Sladen with us on call?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm alive.
Hey, you're up.
Yeah.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just let me save mine.
Oh, also, welcome back to the community. I think I forgot to ping you in Slack.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to do that too.
Yep, can you see my screen?
Yep, I can.
Yeah, so basically I just needed some thoughts on this pull request. So one of the major aims of this pull request was to add an adapter flag to Meshery so that it is able to choose the adapter when it spins up. And because for now it just downloads all of the adapters that are there in the Docker compose file, I think. So basically, what we want to do is, if you can see, it's a development meeting, maybe a code deep dive is not of the
Oh yeah.
order, but yeah, just a few comments on the Docker Compose file. So if you go to see, we have all of the adapters in them, and one of the major features right now is that it pulls in all of those images, and if they aren't there, it updates them. So what we plan to do with this issue is probably be able to choose an adapter and pick it up right up from the Docker Compose file and just load that adapter. However, I was since I'm new to the community, I was made aware that this needs some. Of course, this needs some design decisions to be taken, because it needs to be persistent, and it needs to be in accordance with with what the Meshery tool in general provides. So yeah, that's the overview of the entire pull request. That it's aiming to too long did read kind of a description is just we want to choose the kind of adapter that we are uh, planning to start up, and not spin up and pull up all of the adapters. So I would just like community feedback on this. Yeah, what do people think about this? Any design changes, any sort of first thoughts right off the top of your mind? Can go ahead and share them. Yeah.
Uh, I showed that was a real sign of strength for me right there. I actually held my tongue for like 6 seconds. That was hard. Took a lot of. I was trying to give room for others to opine, for others to weigh in. Thanks for bringing this up, Sladen. There is room for everyone on the call to weigh in. By the way, a little bit about what we're about to talk about is, well, it's a little bit about user experience, and the nice thing about the user experience or discussions around user experience is that everybody's a critic. Everybody's got an opinion on like what feels good and what's useful. So everyone's opinion is valid on this. I'll note that, Sladen, if you're able to navigate back out of the 1,000 tabs that you have open back to the,
Yeah.
I'm just messing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a concern though. Yeah,
You're a
sure.
multitasking master. It's amazing. In the meeting minutes, there's a link to the Meshery CTL design spec, or like the Meshery CLI. Yeah, that one. Everyone on the call should have access. If you don't, just click request access or what have you. Like it's this design spec is, for the most part, well written. Mihu, who's on the call, had done us all a service recently, and had put in like the actual use cases for here's the person, here's the situation, and here's what they would expect to the behavior of a given command. And that's really helpful in digesting why the syntax is structured in the way in which it is. And so anyway, the doc is pretty decent. It needs to be twice to 3 times as long, because there's like twice to 3 times as many features that are in Meshery itself that you can access in the UI. But those capabilities have yet to be exposed in the CLI. Both the UI and the CLI, they both access the same REST API. They're both clients of the REST API. So the only thing holding us back from making Meshery CTL equally as powerful or more than the UI is just some thoughtful design as to the syntax structure and a bit of the interaction. So before we even start, I'll say one thing that would be really helpful is to take lead from Michael, and to begin to make it more, we were trying to be consistent with the structure of how we look at each of the commands. So if you scroll up just a little bit, and you land on a command, it'll have little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Let me know when to stop.
Yeah, maybe one more page. So, well, okay, two more pages. Like that's a decent one. Like this, here's a perf command. And we were trying to be intentional with like, and this all needs to be, and most of it is public facing documentation, but so it says, hey, here's the perf command. Here's the name flag here. It's, we try to give an example and a usage, and if you go up a little bit, there's the behavior, like, yeah. So we talk about behavior, usage, etc. We're trying to be consistent with how we're designing these. And one of the things that we didn't really, that until Mihu had pointed it out, we have yet to really include a scenario, a little bit of like a user story would be, which would be like, here's the task that I'm trying to accomplish. And so if we apply that line of thought to the PR that you have up, which is a good PR, by the way, it's like the 8th, 9th time that someone has said, hey, it's really cool that Meshery manages all these service meshes. And I like that and I enjoy that. I've gotten to learn and use various of them. But I'm kind of honing in on like these 3. And so I'd like it if these other 4 didn't start. And so it's a use case that, you know, that we've heard multiple times and should be there. The approach that has been taken currently in the PR that we have is, here's the use case. It's, or the way in which the approach has been taken is, I'm a user. I'd like to spin up Meshery. When I do, I just want to have, I want to remove a few adapters. Or maybe the more common use case would be, I actually just want to use Meshery for one adapter or one type of service mesh at the moment, because it's easier and quicker just to specify, here's what I want included, as versus like, here's the 7 that I don't want included. And by the way, next week we'll be releasing a 9th. It'll be the Nginx service mesh. So I don't mean we behind the scenes. I mean Abhishek, who's on the call, all of you guys that are contributing. And so it might be, we should give some thought. It's probably more likely the case that someone is interested in removing the waste, the overhead. And when they are, it's probably by whittling it down to like 1, 2, maybe 3 adapters, and the other 6 or what have you can be set aside. The approach here, another artifact of this, oh man, look at that, a user story type, that's awesome. The part of the approach here is that this is transient on what we're doing. It's a one-time, it has a one-time effect. It's mesheryctl system start, you know, -- adapter, you know, and here's the 1 or 2 adapters that I would like to have included. That facilitates this use case. It is transient in so much as that only has an effect for that command, which is a valid use case. It might be that we would find more often than not, and we should take a poll as soon as I say this, it might be that more often than not, you as an individual have sort of permanently crossed out the need to interact with 1 or 2 or 3 of these things, and your list is getting smaller. So therein lie the question, maybe our first question to everybody, which is, do you consider it to be the case that what's more useful to you, a transient start, Meshery system start with only a specific set of adapters, or more of a persistent one where you're configuring like a YAML file, or there's a configuration file where that has identified each of the meshes, and you're persistent, you know, in a persistent way, you're configuring the parameters by which you want Meshery to start. And so that's a question for everyone on the phone.
Yes, this is Michu here. This sounds a bit like sort of like being able to establish profiles on the command line. So I would like to have a profile which I call default and which includes the following adapters that I want to include when I start. Meshery. One could then, for instance, have different profiles and define them as a parameter to the system start command. And maybe also establish them or persist them or write the corresponding YAML files through the mesheryctl.
For my part, I'm glad that you spoke up, Michu, because profiles as a construct, that's a better, I didn't even think about that. That's, I totally agree. Who else has an opinion here? Like, who else thinks that, once you've said, hey, this octarine service mesh sucks, or I'm not going to use it, that's, something of a permanent, that's a choice that you would want to be persistent?
Actually, I have a question. There exists this config flag or option, doesn't it? And two config options. One is called config and the other one config file or something. I don't remember.
That's right.
I have to admit. So how would that be related to this profile ID? Because once I tried to sort of do exactly the same, just having the console adapter, and then I thought creating a new YAML file in the Meshery folder and giving that as startup parameter would sort of lead to that I only get the Meshery adapter, but for some reason I couldn't get it to work. That was a couple of months ago, so maybe it's working now. So how would that relate to this idea of what we're talking about here? Which I think is really good and useful and a very good use case to have, to be able to say, no, I just want to work with a console adapter.
Right. It directly applies. I'm glad that you brought it up. That's actually why I wanted to have this conversation, was really sort of around the fact that I don't know if it's hinted in what the questions that I'm asking. I'm not trying for them to be leading, but I'm more or less hinting that it's my belief that you'll more often than not find individuals that say, yeah, these other 5, that's great. Maybe I'll get to them, but for now, I'd like to look at these if I ever want to bring these back, that they want a persistent choice. And so to Michu's point, there's 2 YAML files today that deal with configuration of Meshery and of mesheryctl. And the notion that there's 2 individual that there's 2 individual files for controlling Meshery's configuration is perhaps appropriate, but I think confused at the moment. And so perhaps best to describe what those 2 YAML files, their purpose and what they do, such that something like a profile, that type of a construct, I think is quite powerful, pretty interesting. It becomes familiar to others. So if as Joshua and others were going through the advanced Istio training here recently, Istio CTL is an example of a different CLI that incorporates the concept of a profile and lets you choose between them. And so as I go to articulate the difference between meshery.yaml and mesheryctl.yaml, we're recording this, so hopefully this will, I'm so sensitive now that I've repeated myself like 10 times on so many subjects over the last, and it doesn't get written down, or I don't go write it down. And it's not all about my thoughts, but just rather somebody needs to put something on paper so people like me who can come over and say, well, why isn't this a profile? And then, so I'm not sure how much of this is in the design spec, Sladen, that you had up, but for all of you who have installed mesheryctl locally, you should find that in your users folder, there's a hidden folder called .meshery. It's a hidden application folder that stores, persists information about Meshery's installation on your local machine. And Sladen, actually, if you wouldn't mind doing me a favor, just if you did an ls on in your user's home folder on .meshery.
Yeah, sure. I can open the file up if you want.
Oh, nice. Okay, sure.
However, my thing is my laptop might just give up on me because there's a ton of stuff running. Forgive me.
That's got nothing to do with those open tabs, I'm sure. Meshery.yaml is one of the two files. Meshery.yaml is nothing more than a Docker Compose file. It's literally verbatim a Docker Compose version 3 compatible file, which is fine for starting up Meshery locally. It's actually, to this use case, it's actually fairly easy to manipulate. You can go in and just comment out adapters that you don't want, save that config, and you're good to go. Like, you've achieved this use case. Actually, you've achieved a persistent use case like that. You can make a duplicate of meshery.yaml and make changes to it. Maybe you don't want Watchtower auto updating your images. You can make a change there, and when you start Meshery, there's a global flag for what meshery.yaml you want to use, what compose file you want to use. That makes some intuitive sense, I think, like that meshery.yaml makes some sense. Here it is right here. But it's, to the extent that it's literally a Docker Compose file, it's constrained. We're constrained. Meshery is constrained to, when you do mesheryctl system start, there is a hard-coded assumption that means Docker Compose. And that's not good. Like, Meshery really, when you boil it down, Meshery will run on a bunch of platforms, on Windows and Linux and a bunch of different Kubernetes, but it essentially always deploys inside of a container. And so it essentially either deploys inside of Docker as a Compose app. You don't have to have it as a Compose app, but it's more convenient when you have it like that. Or it deploys inside of one of like 10 different Kubernetes environments. So it either deploys on Docker or in Kubernetes. It's basically either deploying inside of a Kubernetes cluster in a Docker container, or it's deploying outside of a Kubernetes environment cluster. But we have hard-coded the fact that we assume that when you do a mesheryctl system start, that you're choosing Docker. So I mentioned this because meshery.yaml, in this case, we need to have a degree of separation. So this concept of inserting a profile, well, that's kind of nice. Like, we can start to bring in the notion of in cluster, out of cluster, or like in Docker or in Kubernetes. There's another YAML file here that I don't think that we have an example of. There's just a global flag. And I think Michu has pasted into chat in Zoom that the fact that there are two flags, or there's a few different flags, but one of them, another global flag, is mesheryctl-config. So the first flag that we were just talking about is the -config flag. So if everyone would please draw their attention to the Zoom chat, you'll find that under the flag section, there's a --config. That by default points to the file that we're looking at that Sladen is showing. The second flag, well, it was meant, I think that we've done ourselves wrong maybe here, and we need a bit of a redesign, and profiles probably are part of that. The concept here was that, all right, not only are we assuming that you might start Meshery in Docker, we're kind of also assuming that you're a single cluster environment, that you're a single Kubernetes cluster environment, because we don't really have the concept of context or environment. And so the thought was, well, the poor man's version of a context is the ability to set that inside of mesheryctl -config, like have a YAML file there that has some choices of, a way of configuring the client. And part of that might be the name of the context that you want to connect to, the name of the Kubernetes cluster. And so, Sladen, you kind of stepped into what was, on the surface, like an easy use case, like, hey, I just want to temporarily disable a few adapters. And we could go forth with the PR as you have it, and I think it's helpful. The challenge, I think, is that when we actually step back for a moment and say, we should probably holistically address some of these concerns that we just talked about. What might happen is that inevitably you would end up refactoring the syntax for Meshery, for what you're doing with mesheryctl right now. And not that there are millions of people using Meshery or thousands a day, but at some point, if you change the interface, if you change the syntax around, you start to mess with people. You change the user experience on them. So that was when I'd seen your PR, I was like, oh, hey, that we should talk about this. So my call for action here is, one, more discussion right now, but is also like to potentially flag your PR or that issue as an issue that needs design.
Yeah, makes sense.
And
yeah, I agree. So maybe we could, I could keep it in a draft kind of a state where we keep iterating on, on whether we need the profile or, on whether we can have it as a persistent, mechanism sort of, and we can keep iterating and testing until we find something that's, that's really concrete and we want to go ahead with. Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, Sladen, and actually just beautiful. That's a great response. Actually, just before we tie off that conversation, yeah, hey, leaving open long-lived drafts or long-lived branches, what have you, sounds good. There's this, oh man, boy, this is a bridge to another topic, but I don't want to move off of this just yet, and that's, Shriti, do you mind pasting in the link to the design spec in the Zoom chat? I want to make sure Joshua can get in there, but I harangued you guys for 10 minutes on the thoughts, and I wanted to present kind of the prior thought and some of the problems. I'm super animated about the fixing this, because I think actually fixing it enables other things that people ask for pretty frequently. They say, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could just like use mesheryctl to deploy Meshery into a Kubernetes cluster? Like, yeah, that's actually really easy to do. You just go, but we don't have the right structure. We've got two global flags that point to config files that. So I guess for my part, here's my ask. Michu and others may have a different approach to this, but it's to ask for, like, if anyone would like to if anyone would like to take a crack at the design of what they think that this looks like in the design spec. And you guaranteed you'll get it wrong, or like, that's no, I mean, don't be shy about that. Like, somebody needs to write something down. Anybody want to get beat up in their design? I'm happy to get beat up. I can't find the time. Sladen, well, that's great, man. I really appreciate you raising your hand on that. Yes, I'd love to review that design.
Yeah, definitely. So just to get it right, I'm a bit confused. The design with respect to what exactly? I might have missed your point, I
Yeah, yeah.
guess.
No. I tried to stuff like all the concerns into one big long thing. So that to be concise, the concerns are there isn't a concern with the use case for allowing someone to transiently include or exclude adapters. It's a valid use case. The issue is, I think that as we move forward near term, that syntax structure will change. Knowing that, we should think on a few things. One is that there are two global flags. So when you just type mesheryctl and hit enter, you'll see you'll see a few global flags, but two of them ---- config and ---- mesheryctl config. I think the thought that we're having here is that those might need to combine into one thing, maybe. Or if they don't, fine, we need to insert a new construct, probably called a profile. And there may be a need for another construct or related one called a context. Context is more about environment and like which cluster you're going to be pointing at, or or it's simply the fact that mesheryctl today assumes that when you run a mesheryctl command and it needs to talk to Meshery, the server, that Meshery, the server, is located at localhost. It's like, well, no, because you might have the client installed locally and Meshery server could be in Kubernetes. So I'm not being concise. Frankly, it's like a lot of considerations. We don't have to have a spec that addresses them all. But if you were to write down a paragraph or two, a couple of user stories on the fact that if you just write some user stories, I'll come in and try to lay down the fact that there's a bunch of these other concerns. We want to take a look at incorporating profiles and contexts to address the fact that people want to configure their Meshery deployment from the CLI to include or exclude adapters, to provision to Docker or provision to Kubernetes, and to point to a local or remote Meshery server.
Yeah, I definitely understand now. I get a much more clear understanding of where the profile and where the context is exactly coming from. Yeah. With respect to context, you made a great point that having the kind of Kubernetes or the Docker kind of construct that we would require gives us the kind of flexibility from the shell to be able to make that happen. But yeah, that would require some work on our side. But yeah, some really good points there. I'll definitely take a crack on the design. I love to get myself beat up there, but yeah.
Did you say you put a bullseye on your back? Is that what you?
I get to learn a ton of stuff though.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point. Yeah, I'm excited for you. Honestly, and here's the thing is, I have shame in many areas, although I try to avoid it. And this isn't one of those areas. I would say, not only is this not a shameful thing to do, this is the most appropriate thing to do. That is to go to kubectl, look at how the context command works, go to istioctl, look at how the profile command works, dink around with Docker a little bit if they have, I think they recently, I should know this better as a Docker captain, but they had recently released support for contexts, and that was more in like context of cloud deployments. Like which cloud do you want to deploy your containers to? It's not to go lift other people's ideas and things. I mean, sure, that's an aspect of like to just help facilitate the design. The number one reason why to go do that is like Joshua was saying, hey, I learned about Meshery like a week ago. I'm definitely new to Meshery. As I go to touch the CLI, wouldn't it be great if all of the time that Joshua has spent with Docker CLI, kubectl CLI, Istio CTL, like that it just Meshery CTL intuitively flows for him because the context command works like the other ones and the profile command works like the others. So that's actually in the guiding principles for like, that tells us how to think in context of this. Slayton, I think this is meant for you, man. It's either meant for you or Anirudh, because he loves himself some Meshery CTL, and it's awesome.
Super.
All right, I'm really sorry to intervene, but we should move on. All right, Anirudh, all yours.
Yeah, I don't think he's on. I tossed this in there because it's a good point of discussion. And I don't mean to, like, maybe we should come back to it because otherwise I'll be talking the whole time. Yeah, this is highly related. I would say this is probably on hold pending Slayton's design spec, probably.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite actually, because with the way it kind of it lets you generate a default configuration if it doesn't exist, which is kind of required. Um, uh, yeah, this there are a couple of, after we get the design spec a bit more elaborated, maybe this pull request will make much more sense. So yeah, look out for this one.
Nice. Design required. All right. The other one here was from, well, I think Husana, I think. She goes by Hexdump and she goes by the Piscean, I think. She goes by anything but her name, so it's hard to remember. Oh yeah, Husana. Quite a nice lady. She's recently put in, I think this might be her first PR or a couple, but she's working on Meshery CTL as well. And I thought there's a collection of these things. We should kind of chat through them. Slayton, I know you were giving this some review. Part of what a thought that I had was that that this might be ready for merging, but that there may be some additional issues to log as subsequent improvements. And actually, Slayton, I thought you had a number of them, so that they.
Yeah, some of them actually centered around having multiple permissions, regarding spinning up the Docker daemon if it's if it's not running or if it's not existing. So that was my major not concern. It was more of a major lookout kind of a thing, gotcha kind of a thing, that maybe that could catch us off guard if we're running on different operating systems. So I could, maybe we could put those into issues somewhere if we ever run into them, because we're dealing with multiple operating systems on this one. So it's a good idea to have a look at how it's structured, yeah, with the Docker daemon, because we're attempting to start things on our end, right? So, and even we're attempting to install it, if I'm not wrong. So
Right.
yeah, those are the things to look out for.
I know I'm kind of picking on Joshua since it's his first time here. I want to make sure he feels really. But also, since Joshua, you might have you might have installed Meshery CTL for the first time recently, so this memory might be fresh for you. If you recall, when you install Meshery CTL, if you, Joshua, do you remember? Did you use brew, scoop, or did you just run the bash command to install Meshery? And, Joshua, if you're brew, very good. Okay. So literally it would have taken Joshua 2 commands to install mesheryctl. Actually, if someone would, anyone on the call, if you would volunteer to create an issue to update these instructions, it's 3 instructions, but it can be reduced to 2. The trick here is we can eliminate this line, and instead what needs to be augmented is it should be brew install layer 5 IO / mesheryctl, and those 2 lines can be collapsed into 1. Will someone create an issue for that, for this site?
Sure,
Oh, thank you. So when Joshua installed with brew, he ran 3 commands. He could have just run 2. That's not and if for anyone who uses bash, they literally run 1 command that will grab the mesheryctl binary that's specific to either Mac or Linux, move it, shuffle it around, assign it the right permissions to execute on their system. It will then also take liberty of invoking mesheryctl system start, which will then spin up Docker containers, it'll start Meshery, spin up the containers if Docker is present and available. And it'll also, when the containers are up, it'll auto open the user's default browser if they're not in a headless environment. And I think most of us here have thought like, that's a really small thing, but the UX there is kind of neat. Like, hey, you did one thing and it downloaded, self-installed and self-started and then dropped you off at, you're good to go. You're good to start managing your mesh. Like that's kind of step number 2 is like, there ain't no step number 2. And so, but if Docker isn't running, then it only gets so far. And Hosanna was, saying, well, maybe we should just start. And to Sladen's point, like, what do you all think is starting Docker on someone's machine? Is that like, we're comfortable with opening up their web browser? Are we comfortable with starting Docker, or should that be a prompt to say, Docker is required here? Would you like to start the service? Is that more appropriate?
I don't think the prompt would make any sense, Lee. We can definitely mention that in the requirements, the prerequisites of the command line and or the setup probably. But during execution, it will be a pain because let's say, for example, if someone is uh, starting and stopping and starting, say if they are testing something and they're doing a couple of iterations with mesheryctl, then every time if the prompt comes up, it's a bit annoying.
Yeah, just to add to that, maybe it could ask like, hey, Docker's required, do you want me to start it? And then you just hit an yes or a no, where yeah, something like that.
If the Docker daemon is turned off, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not on, of course, like, you can ask the user that, hey, Docker it's not running, do you want me to spin it up for you or run it for you? And then when the user hits a Y, you then start the Docker container, I mean the server. It's not.
Uh, that sounds cool. What I had in my mind is much simpler, as in to send out an error saying that make sure you have Docker daemon running or something. The other one is also works. I'll leave it to the opinion of the rest of the team.
Now, so there's a subsequent concern here, and it's one that I hope becomes an issue soon. And that is that as you look at Hosanna's issue, is that I think she's actually addressing, she's addressing this inside of mesheryctl itself. So, okay. But again, the assumption is that you're deploying to Docker. not necessarily deploying to Kubernetes. So I'm hoping that soon we'll have a design for, and we'll be able to use mesheryctl to provision Meshery inside of Kubernetes, and that the particular enhancement that Hosanna is making doesn't apply. Like we'll just, this is when we go to merge her enhancement, it'll be one of those things we'll need to come back to make sure that we're considering for the difference between running in Docker, running in Kubernetes. Good. So for my part, I would vote that we would kind of go forth, that Sladen, I think that's a good example of like, we should raise another issue for prompting the user to say, hey, you're not running. Would you like for us to?
Definitely makes sense. Completely.
Dhruv, you've done some work here recently with overcoming some Grafana issues. Do you want to show those?
Yeah, totally. And I'm sorry I was on and off meeting if you ever like, called for me.
Nope.
So, one sec. Did manage to this is really annoying. The Zoom thing is blocking me to change stuff. Okay. Yeah. So basically the error before was we are not able to persist the link to the localhost of Grafana while we reload it, right? And we couldn't do that because it was fetching it from the database itself. And it takes some time for it to load. And yeah, I fixed it in a way for now. But the another problem over here is in the database, we are not storing the boards itself, right? So we need to fetch those boards once again. And the thing, how we are doing this is, it is really, the architecture right now is like, it is storing the values both in the state and the Redux state itself. So whenever there is a change, we need to call a lifecycle function like get derived state from props, which we called before. But the thing over here is we cannot call a function after we change the state itself. So for a temporary sort of hack right now, I'm using a old lifecycle function called component will receive props, which enables us to invoke a function after the local state is changed, right? And this is just a temporary fix. A better fix would be to restructure the design of the Grafana component itself, because right now the Redux store and the local store both are saving the same data, and the how we resolve the conflict between which data we want to use is getting more messier. So yeah, it's fixed for now. We need a better structure to like not use a whole lifecycle method, which won't be supported after React 17. So yeah, I will stop now. Could you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Or I was muted the whole...
No. That just shows how self-centered you are. You were muted the whole time, just didn't you? No, that is such a relief to me. I was trying to not comment because
The goal was to, before the workshop, we could fix the bug. Like, that's why I made it like this. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, totally. Because there's another Istio workshop starting in an hour-ish. It's not advanced, it's the intro, but they're pretty related. We use Meshery to teach people, and we're going to show some the Grafana integration. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that we can include this. This is a relief to me, Dhruv. It's not a complete relief because of what you were mentioning about this being somewhat timestamped or dated of a solution with respect to dependency on React 17.
Yeah, once we move to React 17, this won't work. And yeah, we should probably change the structure. But like, if I want to use the Redux store itself, then we should use that instead of having both prop and state save the same things. Like I need to look into why we did that in the first place to understand that whether changing it would be a good idea or not. So yeah, I will look into that before changing anything.
Okay.
Don't see any reason yet for there to be two different data. Yeah.
I'm fuzzy there as well. The one thing that I would offer is that there's some amount of information that we cache, or I would say cache locally in the Meshery server container, the instance that's running Meshery server.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of info that gets stored on the user's local file system that we were just looking at earlier under .meshery. There's two small, I forget the name of the Golang database implementation that we're using, but just to persist some data to the file system. There's that. The other component that comes in here is our providers. So if a user signs in using a remote provider, there's also persistence that happens out to the remote provider. I don't know if how much of that is related to where state is stored with respect to the browser and Redux store and things, but
Are you looking for Bitcask?
yeah, Bitcask.
Got Bitcast? I didn't get that.
Bitcask is the small Golang implementation of a data store that we use to persist some of that data to disk to file system. And also I think it provides an in-memory cache, if I recall. But so anyway, I'm mentioning that stuff. I don't know. I think it's related to the Redux and things that we're storing inside of the browser, but yeah.
No, the thing is when you reload, all the data in Redux and the local state would be cleared and the initialized data would go there. And we are fetching the data from the server itself, the server's cache, right? And when we are doing it, it is getting saved in the Redux state. And then we are getting that same data and using it in the local state itself instead of directly using them, which is causing this havoc.
Cool.
Where the local state is only updated if the Redux state the timestamp in Redux state is more newer than the one in the local state. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why we're using two different ones. I do know that, yeah, as a user, like I'll have to refresh occasionally to like dump some of that data from the from the single page app that, I could see. Is there any amount of concern that when we refresh and that cache is wiped, that yeah, I think as you guys work on mesh map and the visual topology, there might be a different concern there about what gets cached because and what doesn't, how much of it gets refreshed, because that should be a lot of data, or I expect it will be a lot of data. So anyway, I'm just talking out loud, trying to help you think through it. I definitely don't have an answer here. So thanks for these fixes, Drew. I'm looking forward to your analysis about State Store and Redux. Who else has got something to say? I'm not going to join next week's call, I think, just so that you guys don't have to listen to me. What else do we have, Shriti? We're about at time.
Not much. I guess the NG INX adapter demo would be next week. So we're done for the day.
Actually, there was one issue about common libraries that I added to the agenda. Maybe we can take this on Friday, or would you?
If it's not too long, we can spare a minute or so on it.
No, it takes more than a minute. So if Abhishek and I prepared a presentation and some sort of preliminary thoughts, and we'll need to give some background, and then I guess there will be a discussion as well. That's what we're hoping for anyway. So I think it takes at least 10, 15 minutes, I would say.
Completely understand. We'll take it up next week then.
Yeah. Or at the community meeting, like you were saying, like actually there's kind of two items on the agenda. One is the HashiCorp console product manager will come present the latest and greatest, but those two items on Friday, that sounds great. I mean, we're overdue on the common library discussion.
Sure. Is that okay,
Sounds
Mikko?
great. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
All right, that's it for today. Let's end on time for once. Thanks for coming in, everybody. All the newcomers, please join us again for the next meeting next week, same time. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Srini.
Thank you. Same to you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.